It would be argued, of course, that the reason that they lost their nerve was because the markets responded and said, look, you know, this is crazy stuff. You know, we've got interest rates going through the roof. I know they were already sort of going northwards anyway, and that was what was wrong. The reality was it couldn't work, even if notionally you quite like the idea of it working.
Well, it could have worked. The problem was we had a thoroughgoing crisis with the pension funds because of Bank of England poor supervision and regulation of the funds and related regulators pushing them to hold more and more gilts instead of equities. And that was the problem. So that crisis of the pension funds exploded at the same time. And the bank really sat on its hands. It kind of didn't do what it should have done, which is to support the government in the markets. Had it done so, we'd have got through that very bumpy episode and rates would have then come down. It was a tragedy, really, that the whole of the civil service and the kind of Mandarin class really opposed the program and undermined it. It was a tragedy.
And just finally, Patrick, I mean, we're asking the question here today, you know, what is the way out of the UK economy? There's a couple of things have been happening. Rachel Reeves went to China, of course. She's talking about £600 million of investment, which, of course, sounds like an awful lot of money. You wouldn't mind winning that on a Saturday afternoon at the races. But in the grander scale, that isn't a huge amount. So that's one area that is either exciting people or disappointing them, depending on where you sit on China. Then we've got the AI thing with Keir Starmer today. He's talking about us being a sort of world leader in the AI department, although some suggesting that boat has already begun to sail long ago, so we've got to play catch-up. Is there anything you can see this government could do in order to get us out? I mean, you mentioned the taxation. What is your perception then of the next 6 months to 12 months based on the current trajectory where we're likely to be?
Well, I'm very gloomy because Labour has pinned its colours to this terrible budget which has hammered business, and that's a tragedy. So I think the first thing it's got to do is to start making nice with business, you know, and saying, look, we're going to reverse engines on this. We're going to make sure you're on side and help us to produce growth. Until they do that, I feel very gloomy about the prospects. That's the fundamental problem.
Patrick, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. Patrick Minford, Professor of Applied Economics, Cardiff Business School. I think a man who Mrs. Thatcher often looked at as a fellow that had some good fiscal thinking. Let's speak with Vince Cable, former business secretary. Vince, good afternoon to you. I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I would imagine you probably disagree with almost everything you just heard Patrick Minford say.
No, I partly agree with it. But certainly the budget didn't help business confidence, and business confidence is crucial, and we need business investment. So, but the origins of that problem were before the last general election, where the Labour Party promised not to raise basic taxes on income, value-added tax. So they could have gone to the country and said, we've got a fiscal problem, everybody's going to have to contribute, but they didn't. They tied their own hands, and we were left with these rather damaging, business-unfriendly taxes. To that extent, I agree with Patrick Minford, but the problems are much deeper and longer. I mean, we've been stuck in this low-growth trap for forever. I mean, I've been engaged in public debates for 60 years, and it was, you know, why isn't Britain doing better? Certainly since the financial crisis, we've had a succession of shocks. We had the financial crisis itself, we had Brexit, we had the Ukraine war, we've had COVID, all of which have damaged the economy and piled up debt. And it's a very serious problem for any government. But I would start by agreeing with Patrick that you need a growth process. We had one in the coalition. We had a combination of fiscal discipline and growth-promoting industrial strategy and deregulation, and we're making real headway.
Do you sense, I mean, I mentioned China as business secretary. I mean, did you go to China when you were business secretary? Was that an area that you had to explore yourself?
Yes, I did. I went 3 times. I went to India 4 times, Brazil twice, because the government took the view that although our main trading area was the European Union, we should be looking long-term to the big emerging markets, and China and India are top of that list. So we had to build relationships there. I think it still remains a powerful case for doing that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say on that point, is Rachel Reeves doing the right thing? Because there's naturally, as China, there's an argument that says their star is yet to fully rise in terms of dominance, second biggest economy. Some suggesting it could be the first. We'll have no choice but to suck up to China, get closer. And of course, that brings with it some ethical questions as well. But is it inevitable that China will be the area where we have to go almost cap in hand?
Well, we shouldn't go a cup in hand, but we should recognise the fact that we now have two superpowers, roughly comparable economic importance, you can argue, to the cows come home about which is bigger and which is smaller. The United States is currently in a pretty dynamic state. China's had serious economic problems the last couple of years that may persist. But in the long run, China will be a major economic player. It has been already. It's helped to drive the world economy after the financial crisis, and we need to hedge our relationships. We need to have much closer relations with the European Union, but with the emerging market, and of course the United States. And in all of these cases, we may be dealing with people we don't like very much, but you have to work with them. Britain is in a position to demand that they change their political system to fit ours.
Do you think one of the problems is we don't quite know kind of who we are in the business, on the business economic stage? We were once a big manufacturing base. We had mining, we had all sorts of cotton mills, car manufacturing. Of course, late 70s, throughout the 80s, we became the start of a service providing kind of country, and we can argue, the good or the bad in all of that. And now we're kind of in a bit of a no man's land, aren't we? Who are we economically? When the world looks at the UK, what are they seeing? What are they looking at?
Well, I think your analysis is spot on. I mean, I think a lot of countries feel Britain's a bit adrift, where we've left the European Union, but we haven't got any alternative arrangement. But I don't think we should talk the country down too much. I mean, there are lots of strengths. You mentioned services. Britain is actually one of the leading services exporters in the world. We do very well, not just in finance, but creative industries. The universities are major exporters by bringing in overseas students. There are lots of strengths to the British economy, not least, English language, right time zone, openness to business, openness to foreign investment. These are all positive things. And although we have serious problems, there are good things in the UK, and we should trumpet them.
And just a very final point, Vince, 6 months down the line, where do you see the economy? I mean, it's having more than a bit of a wobble at the moment. Can Rachel Reeves rescue it?
Well, she can't rescue it single-handedly, but there is a global problem. I mean, bond yields are rising almost everywhere. Some countries are being really hammered very badly. I mean, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, they're in a worse position than the UK. But the UK is exposed. In a sense, we're in the same sort of position as Italy, but Italy has the Eurozone behind it, and we don't. So we are vulnerable, and we are dependent on the kindness of strangers, the people who lend us money. So the government has to be very careful. It probably will involve breaking one of their two pledges. They will have to raise taxes of some kind, probably. And they may have to relax their fiscal rules, particularly this idea of reducing debt to GNP over 5 years. They've dug themselves into very rigid positions that a sensible government would be more flexible about.
Vince Cable, thank you. Former Business Secretary with the Coalition Government 2010.